I didn't choose that elevator. I chose survival. The rain hit the pavement like it was trying to break through it, loud, relentless, drowning out everything except the sound of my own breathing. Too fast. Too sharp. My sneakers slipped slightly as I turned the corner, my shoulder brushing against the cold glass wall of the building lobby. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could hear him. Emily. His voice echoed behind me, closer than it should have been. Closer than I wanted to believe. My chest tightened. I pushed harder, shoving through the revolving door and stumbling into the marble lobby, the sudden warmth hitting my soaked skin like a shock. The front desk clerk looked up, startled, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. My eyes locked onto the elevator at the far end. The numbers above it were counting down. 12, 11, 10. Come on, I whispered, my voice barely there, my hand hovering over the call button before slamming it repeatedly like it could make time move faster. Footsteps behind me. Heavy. Determined. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Jason had made it inside. His jacket was soaked, his expression twisted into something I didn't recognize anymore. Something that didn't belong to the man I used to trust. My stomach dropped. The elevator dinged. The door slid open. I didn't think. I ran in and hit the close button over and over, my finger trembling as the doors began to slide shut. Jason lunged forward. His hand almost caught the edge. Almost. But the door sealed with a soft click, cutting him off. Silence. Just like that. My body sagged back against the mirrored wall, my lungs fighting to catch up, my heart still racing like it hadn't realized the danger was paused. Not gone. Just paused. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, pressing my palms against the cool metal railing. You should be more careful who you run to. The voice came from behind me. Low. Calm. Controlled. I froze. Slowly, I opened my eyes and turned. He stood in the corner like he had been there the whole time, like he belonged to the silence. Tall. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that hadn't even been touched by the rain. Dark hair neat. Precise. His posture relaxed, but not casual. Nothing about him felt casual. His eyes met. Mine. Dark. Steady. Watching. Not surprised. Not concerned. Just aware. My throat went dry. I didn't see you. I managed, my voice small, uneven. He didn't respond right away. Just studied me, like he was reading something written beneath my skin. The elevator hummed as it started moving, the gentle vibration grounding me and unsettling me at the same time. Clearly, he said finally. One word. Flat. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag. I'm sorry, I just needed to. A loud bang cut me off. My whole body jerked. The elevator doors rattled as something hit them from the outside. Jason. Emily. Open the door. My breath hitched again, panic rushing back in like it had never left. I stepped back instinctively, pressing closer to the opposite wall. The man didn't move, didn't even glance at the doors. The banging came again, louder this time, more desperate, more aggressive. I looked at him, my voice barely above a whisper. He's not going to stop. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached into his jacket. Not rushed, not tense, just deliberate. He pulled out his phone and held it to his ear. Level 1, he said quietly. Handle it. That was it. No explanation. No raised voice. Just a statement. The banging stopped. Not slowly. Not fading. Just stopped. Like someone had pressed a mute button on the world outside. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise had been. My heart pounded even harder. I stared at the closed doors, then back at him. What did you just do? I asked, my voice shaking despite how much I tried to steady it. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his gaze never leaving mine. The elevator continued its smooth ascent, like nothing had happened, like everything had changed. I made sure, he said softly, that he won't follow you anymore. The words should have felt like relief. They didn't, because in that moment, standing in that quiet, enclosed space, I realized something that made my chest tighten for an entirely different reason. I hadn't escaped anything. I had just stepped into something else. The elevator did not stop. It did not slow. It kept rising like it had already decided my destination for me. I stared at the glowing panel above the doors, my fingers still curled tight around my bag, my pulse refusing to settle. I did not press anything. I said quietly, more to myself than to him, but he heard it anyway. You did not need to, he replied. His voice was calm, almost detached, like everything happening was exactly as it should be. That did not help. Not even a little. I shifted my weight, glancing at the floor numbers as they climbed past where I knew the public offices ended. 10, 11, 12. This building did not have more than 12 floors open to tenants. I knew that. I had been here before. This is not right, I whispered. The elevator did not respond to my fear. It just kept moving. I stepped forward and pressed the panel, hitting the button for the lobby again. Nothing changed. The light did not even flicker. My stomach tightened. Why is it not stopping? I asked, turning toward him again. He had not moved from his place. Not even an inch. One hand rested loosely in his pocket, the other relaxed at his side. Completely at ease. Like this was normal. Like I was the only one out of place. Because this elevator does not belong to the lobby, he said. I blinked. What does that even mean? He tilted his head slightly, studying me again with that same unreadable expression. It means, he said slowly, you are no longer going where you intended. A soft chime echoed. The movement stopped. My breath caught in my throat. The door slid open, and nothing on the other side looked familiar. The hallway beyond was quiet. Too quiet. Dim lighting stretched across polished floors, casting long shadows along walls lined with dark wood panels. No signs. No office doors. No people. Just space. Controlled. Private. My feet did not move at first. I stayed where I was, staring at it like stepping out would change something permanent. Where are we? I asked. He stepped forward then, finally moving past me with a smooth, unhurried stride. Safe, he said simply. That word should have comforted me. It did not. Not when it came from someone like him. I hesitated, then followed. One step, then another. The air felt different out here. Still. Filtered. Like even sound was not allowed unless permitted. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the elevator doors closed behind me without a sound. I turned quickly, instinct. Kicking in, reaching back as if I could stop them. Too late. Gone. The soft reflection of my own face stared back at me in the metal surface. Trapped. Not physically. Not yet. But something inside me shifted. What is this place? I asked again, my voice tighter now. He did not answer right away. Instead, he walked a few feet down the hall, and like they had been waiting for him, two men stepped out from the shadows. Both in dark suits. Both standing straighter the moment they saw him. Sir, one of them said quietly, lowering his head just enough to show respect. Sir. The word landed heavier than anything else so far. My eyes flicked back to him. He did not acknowledge the title. Not verbally. Just a slight nod. Enough. Always enough. No interruptions, he said. The man nodded immediately. Of course. No hesitation. No questions. Just obedience. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening again. Who are you? I asked, the question finally forcing its way out of me. He turned then, fully facing me for the first time since we stepped out. Closer now. Close enough that I could see the faint detail in his eyes. Not just dark. Focused. Calculated. Controlled. You ran from a man who thought he owned you, he said, his voice quieter now. Not softer. Just closer. More direct. My chest tightened at the words. He took one step closer. Not threatening, but deliberate. And you stepped into an elevator without looking, he continued. Another step. That was not a mistake. My breath caught. Then what was it? I asked. He held my gaze, unwavering. A decision, he said. A pause. Just long enough to make my heart skip. You just have not understood it yet. The word decision lingered in the air longer than it should have, like it carried weight I could not yet see, and I hated that my body reacted before my mind could catch up, my pulse quickening, my instincts pulling in two opposite directions at once, one telling me to run, the other telling me it was already too late for that. I did not decide anything, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady even as my fingers tightened against the strap of my bag. I was trying to get away, he watched me. For a moment, not interrupting, not correcting, just letting. The silence stretched until it felt like I had said something incomplete. Then he spoke, calm as ever. People reveal their choices when they are under pressure, he said, not when they feel safe. I swallowed, because something about that felt too accurate, too close to the truth I did not want to admit. I looked past him, down the hallway, searching for something normal, an exit sign, a door, anything that reminded me of the world I understood, but everything here felt intentional, controlled. Like every detail existed because someone had decided it should. I need to leave, I said, more firmly this time, taking a small step back, creating distance, even if it was only a few inches. Thank you for whatever you did back there. But I am fine now. He did not move to block me, did not reach out, did not raise his voice, which somehow made it worse. You believe that, he said. And it was not a question. I frowned, frustration mixing with the unease already building in my chest. I know that, I corrected, but even to my own ears, it sounded less certain than I wanted. His gaze shifted briefly, not to me, but past me, subtle, almost invisible, and I realized too late that the two men behind me had already adjusted their positions, not aggressively, not threatening, just present, positioned in a way that made the space feel smaller, more contained. My breath slowed without permission, my body recognizing something my mind had not fully processed yet. Control. You are not. Fine, he said quietly, bringing my attention back to him. You were followed into a public building by someone who does not respect your boundaries. Each word was measured, deliberate, not emotional, just factual, and somehow that made it harder to argue with. That does not disappear because a door closed. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out right away, because I knew that part was true. I had felt it. The way Jason had looked at me, the way he had not stopped, the way he would not have stopped. I exhaled slowly, trying to regain some sense of control over the conversation, over myself. That still does not explain why I am here, I said, softer now, but more focused, or why I cannot just walk out. For the first time, something shifted. In his expression, not emotion exactly, but recognition, like I had finally asked the right question. You can walk, he said, and then paused, just long enough to make the next part matter. But you will not get far. My stomach tightened again. That is not reassuring, I said, and despite everything, a hint of honesty slipped through my tone. He stepped slightly to the side then, not blocking the hallway, but not clearing it either, offering just enough space to make the choice feel real. Try, he said simply, no challenge in his voice, no force, just an invitation. I hesitated for a second, then moved. One step forward, then another, my eyes flicking briefly to the men behind me, who did not stop me, did not even look at me, just stood there like they had no reason to interfere. I kept walking, my pace steady, my heart loud in my ears. 10 feet, maybe 12, the hallway stretched ahead, quiet, empty. And then I saw it, a door at the end, simple, unmarked. I reached it, my hand closing around the handle, cool metal under my fingers. I pulled it open, expecting freedom, expecting something familiar. Instead, I froze, because on the other side was not a lobby, not a street, not anything I recognized, just another controlled space, another quiet corridor, another layer. I turned slowly, looking back at him, confusion tightening into something sharper, something closer to realization. He had not moved, still standing where I left him, watching, waiting. This floor is private, he said, his voice carrying easily through the space between us. Everything connected to it is, too. My grip loosened slightly on the handle, my mind racing to catch up with what that meant, with what I had stepped into without understanding. He took one step forward, then another, closing the distance with the same calm precision. You wanted distance from him, he continued. Now you have it. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes holding mine, steady, unshaken. The question is, he added, quieter now, what you are willing to accept in exchange. The question settled between us like something heavier than it should have been, not loud, not forced, just there, waiting for me to answer it even though I did not fully understand it yet. I let go of the door slowly, my fingers brushing against the cool metal as I stepped back into the hallway, back into his space, because somehow it already felt like his, not mine, not neutral, his. I am not trading anything, I said, lifting my chin slightly, trying to reclaim something that felt like control, even if it was just my voice. I just want to go home. The word home felt distant the moment I said it, like it belonged to a version of tonight that no longer existed. He watched me carefully, not dismissing me, not agreeing either, just observing, calculating. Home, he repeated, quieter, like he was testing the weight of it. Then his gaze shifted slightly, just enough to signal something without words. One of the men behind me stepped forward, not close enough to invade my space, but close enough to place a small object on the narrow table along the wall. A phone. My phone. I froze for a second before moving toward it, my pulse picking up again. I reached for it quickly, like I was afraid it might disappear if I hesitated. The screen lit up the moment I touched it, and my breath caught. Missed calls, messages, all from one name, Jason, over and over, the timestamps stacking on top of each other, closer and closer together, more urgent, more persistent. My stomach tightened. I did not open them. I did not need to. I already knew what they would say. I locked the screen again, my fingers trembling just slightly before I forced them still. I turned back to him. He will not stop, I admitted, the truth slipping out. Before I could hold it back, his expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. Not satisfaction, not approval, just confirmation. No, he said simply. He will not. The honesty in it made my chest feel tight again. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself, trying to think past the immediate fear. That still does not mean I stay here, I said, softer now, but more grounded, more deliberate. He took a step closer, not enough to intimidate, but enough that I had to meet. His gaze directly. You are not staying, he said, and for the first time, there was something different in his tone, not softer, but clearer, more precise. You are deciding. I frowned slightly, confusion pulling at the edges of my thoughts. That is not the same thing, I said. He tilted his head just slightly, as if considering that, then replied. It is, when the alternatives are real. I held his gaze, refusing to look away, even though part of me wanted to. Then tell me the alternatives, I said, and this time, my voice did not shake. It held, steady. He watched me for a long second, like he was measuring something. Then he spoke, calm, direct. You walk out of this building alone, he said, and he will find you again. No drama, no exaggeration, just fact. Or, he continued, you stay within a system that does not allow him access to you. The words settled differently this time, not like a threat, but like a structure, something defined, something controlled. I glanced briefly at the hallway, at the quiet precision of everything around me, at the way nothing here felt accidental, then back at him. And what does that system want from me? I asked, because that was the part that mattered, the part that had been unspoken until now. He did not answer immediately, which somehow made it more serious, more intentional. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, not in volume, but in weight. Awareness, he said. Honesty. A pause, just long enough to let the last word land. And trust. I let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. You expect that from someone you just met, I said. He held my gaze without hesitation. I expect you to understand what you are choosing, he replied. And there it was again, that word, choosing, like he refused to let me see this as anything else, like he was forcing me to own it. I looked down at my phone again, at the name still sitting on the screen even through the lock, then back at him. Something shifting inside me. Not comfort, not yet, but clarity, just enough to feel it, just enough to know that whatever happened next, it would not be accidental. And if I say no? I asked quietly. His expression did not change, not even slightly. Then I will still make sure you leave safely tonight, he said, but I will not be there tomorrow. The words landed differently than everything else he had said, not forceful, not threatening, just final. And for the first time since I stepped into that elevator, I felt the full weight of what he meant. Not control, not obligation, but consequence. I tightened my grip on my phone slightly, my thoughts racing, my heart no longer just reacting, but deciding. And when I looked back at him, something in my voice had changed, just enough to matter. Then maybe, I said slowly, you should start explaining exactly what I am stepping into. He did not answer right away, and that silence felt intentional, like he was deciding how much I was allowed to understand, how much I was ready to hear. His gaze stayed on me, steady, measuring, and for a moment I wondered if this was the real test, not the hallway, not the locked doors, but this, whether I would stand there and wait or turn away. I did not move. I held his eyes, and something in his expression shifted just slightly, not softer, but resolved. You stepped into a controlled network, he said finally, his voice even, precise, not a place. I frowned, the words settling differently than I expected. What does that mean? I asked. He gestured subtly around us, not dramatically, just enough to include the hallway, the doors, the men who did not speak unless spoken to. It means nothing here is accidental, he said. Access is limited, movement is monitored, and presence is intentional. My grip tightened slightly around my phone again, my mind trying to keep up. So, this is what security? I asked. He held my gaze. It is control, he corrected, and the word landed heavier than I expected. I exhaled slowly, trying to ground myself in something logical, something familiar. And you control it, I said, not a question. He did not deny it, did not confirm it either, just watched me like the answer was already obvious, which somehow made it more real. I shifted my weight slightly, glancing once more down the hallway, then back at him. Why me? I asked. Because that was the part that did not fit, the part that made the least sense. I ran into the wrong elevator. That is it. He stepped closer, just one step, enough to close the space again, enough that his presence felt more defined. You ran into a protected environment while being pursued, he said. That makes you relevant. I blinked. Relevant to what? I asked. He paused, just briefly, then answered. To risk. The words settled in my chest, heavier than the others, more personal. I let out a small breath, shaking my head slightly. I am not part of anything, I said. I do not have connections, I do not have enemies like that. I stopped, because even as I said it, I knew it was not entirely true. Jason had proven that tonight. The way he followed me, the way he refused to stop, the way he acted like I was something he could not lose control over. I swallowed, my voice quieter now. I just made a mistake. He studied me for a long second, then spoke again, his tone unchanged. Mistakes do not determine outcomes, he said. Responses do. I felt that one more than I expected, something about it cutting through the noise in my head, forcing clarity where there had only been reaction before. I looked down at my phone again, then back at him. And your response is to keep me here, I said. He shook his head slightly. No, he said. My response is to give you a controlled option. I narrowed my eyes just slightly. That sounds the same, I replied, and for the first time, the corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but something close to acknowledgement. It is not, he said, because you can still walk away. I held his gaze, testing that statement, weighing it against everything I had seen so far. The locked elevator, the private floor, the silent men who followed his instructions without question, and yet, he had not stopped me, not physically, not directly. I had walked to the door, I had opened it, I had seen what waited beyond, and I had come back on my own. The realization settled slowly, uncomfortable, but clear. I had chosen to stay in that moment, even if I had not fully understood why. I exhaled again, slower this time, more deliberate, then explained the option. I said, my voice steady now, no longer just reacting, but asking. He nodded once, like that was what he had been waiting for. You remain within environments that are under my control, he said, places where access is restricted and monitored. I listened carefully, every word landing sharper now. You move with awareness, he continued. You follow structure, and you do not act unpredictably. I frowned slightly. And in return, I said. He met my eyes, unwavering. You are not reachable by anyone I do not allow. The hallway felt quieter after that. Like even the air understood what that meant. I let the words settle, feeling their weight, their implication, their cost. Then I asked the only question that mattered now. And you, I said slowly. What do you get out of it? His answer came without hesitation, calm, direct. Control over a variable that entered my system, he said, nothing more. I held his gaze, searching for something else behind it, something hidden, but all I found was certainty. And that, somehow, was more unsettling than anything else so far. I tightened my grip on my phone one more time, then let it loosen, my shoulders easing just slightly as something inside me shifted from panic into decision. Not comfort, not trust, but awareness. The kind that made everything sharper, clearer, more real. And when I spoke again, my voice carried that change. Then I guess, I said quietly, I need to decide if being out there is more dangerous than being in here with you. The silence after my words did not feel empty. It felt measured, like he was letting the weight of my own question settle before he answered it. And for the first time since I stepped into that elevator, I realized he was not rushing me, not pushing, not forcing, just waiting, giving me space to understand what I was already standing inside. You already know the answer, he said finally, his voice calm, steady, like he was stating something obvious, not trying to convince me. I let out a slow breath, my eyes dropping for a second before lifting back to his, because he was right. I did know. I just did not want to admit it yet. Out there is unpredictable, he continued. In here, it is not. I shifted slightly, my fingers brushing against the edge of my phone again, grounding myself in something familiar, something real. Predictable does not always mean safe, I replied, and this time, my voice carried more thought than fear. He tilted his head just slightly, acknowledging that. No, he said, but it allows preparation. That word settled differently. Preparation, not protection, not control, something more calculated, more deliberate. I glanced down the hallway again, noticing things I had not before, small details, subtle placements, the way the lighting did not cast shadows in certain corners, the way the doors were spaced evenly, the quiet precision of it all. It was not just controlled, it was designed, and that realization made my chest tighten in a different way. Nothing here is random, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. He did not correct me, which was answer enough. I looked back at him, my thoughts sharper now, clearer. So if I stay, I said, slowly, I follow your structure, your rules. He nodded once, simple, direct, and if I leave, I added. He held my gaze, unwavering. Then you return to variables you cannot control. The phrasing was exact, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just factual, and somehow that made it harder to dismiss. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of both options pressing in from different directions, neither of them easy, neither of them familiar. I shifted my stance slightly, straightening my shoulders. Not out of confidence, but out of decision, because I could feel it forming now, whether I liked it or not. What kind of rules? I asked, and this time, I did not hesitate. He stepped slightly to the side, gesturing down the hallway. Walk with me, he said, not an order, not a command, just an expectation. I hesitated for half a second, then moved, falling into step beside him, aware of the distance, aware of his presence, aware of everything. The two men behind us did not follow, which I noticed immediately, which I stored away without asking, because that mattered. We walked in silence for a few steps, the sound of our footsteps soft against the polished floor, controlled even in that. Then he spoke. First, he said, you do not move without informing me. I frowned slightly. That sounds like control, I said. He glanced at me briefly. It is coordination, he corrected. So I can anticipate risk. I absorbed that, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just processing. Second, he continued, you do not engage with unknown variables. I raised an eyebrow slightly. People, I said, translating it. He gave a slight nod. Situations, he added. Locations. I let out a quiet breath. So I avoid everything, I said. He looked forward again. You avoid what you do not understand, he replied, and that one landed differently closer to something I could accept. We reached another door, this one different, larger, with a subtle panel beside it. He placed his hand against it for a brief second, and the door unlocked with a soft click. He pushed it open, stepping aside just enough for me to see inside. A room, warm lighting, clean, structured, but more human, less like a corridor, more like a space meant to exist in. I looked back at him, my thoughts still moving, still adjusting. And the last rule, I said because I knew. There was one more. There always was. He met my gaze again, closer now, more direct. You do not lie to me, he said quietly, not louder, not harsher, but somehow more absolute than everything else he had said so far. I held his eyes, feeling that one settled deeper than the others, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them, like it mattered more than anything else, like it was the only one he would not compromise on. I took a slow breath, my fingers loosening slightly at my sides, my thoughts no longer scattered, but aligned, and when I spoke again, my voice was different, steadier, more certain than before. Then I guess, I said quietly. This is where I stop reacting and start choosing. The room felt different the moment I stepped inside. Not just quieter, but contained in a way the hallway had not been. Like the air itself had edges, soft lighting spread across dark wood and clean lines. Nothing excessive, nothing out of place. Everything chosen. I paused just past the threshold, my eyes moving slowly across the space, taking in the details without meaning to. A low couch against one wall, a glass table untouched, a window stretching wide enough to show the city below, rain. Still tracing faint lines against the glass, distant now, quieter from up here. I had not realized how high we were until that moment. This is where I stay, I said, not quite a question. He stepped in behind me, the door closing softly with a sound that felt more final than it should have. For now, he replied. I turned slightly, watching him as he moved further into the room like it belonged to him the same way everything else did. Effortless, natural, controlled. You said I was not staying, I said, a small edge returning to my voice. He stopped near the window, his reflection faint against the glass as he looked out over the city. You are not being kept, he corrected. There is a difference. I let out a quiet breath, my arms crossing loosely, more out of instinct than defense. It does not feel like one, I admitted. He turned his head slightly, just enough to look at me again. That will change, he said, and something about the certainty in his voice made it hard to argue. I shifted my weight, my gaze drifting back to the window, to the city lights blurred by rain, cars moving like distant lines of motion, everything still happening out there, normal, chaotic, uncontrolled. I swallowed, a quiet realization settling in. I was not part of that right now. I was above it, separated from it. What happens next? I asked, softer now, not because I was unsure, but because I was choosing to understand. He stepped away from the window, closing the distance between us again. Not too close, just enough to keep my attention anchored to him. You rest, he said simply. I blinked slightly, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. That is it? I asked. He nodded once. You process, he added. And tomorrow, you decide with a clear mind. I studied him for a moment, trying to find the angle, the catch, something hidden beneath the words, but there was nothing obvious, just that same controlled certainty. And you trust that I will still be here, I said, testing him. Now, he did not hesitate. I do not offer what I do not intend to keep, he replied, and that answer landed differently than I expected, not comforting, but solid, like something that did not bend once it was set. I looked down at my phone again, still in my hand, the screen dark now, silent, but I could feel what it held, the messages, the pressure, the past still trying to reach me. I let out a slow breath and slipped it into my bag, out of sight, not gone, but distant, just for now. And him, I said quietly, not needing to say Jason's name. He understood anyway. He will not reach you tonight, he said, not a promise filled with emotion, just a fact delivered without hesitation. I held his gaze, searching for something more, something that explained how he could say that so easily. But again, all I found was control. I nodded once, slowly, accepting the answer for what it was, not because I trusted it completely, but because I understood it was real. I turned slightly, taking another step into the room, letting the space settle around me. Unfamiliar, but not threatening, structured, not chaotic. I ran my fingers lightly along the back of the couch, grounding myself in something physical, something present. Then I stopped, turning back to him one more time. You said no lies, I said, my voice steady again. He met my gaze without hesitation. Then do not lie to me now, I continued. Why did you really let me stay? The question hung there, heavier than anything I had asked before, because this time, I was not asking about rules or systems or safety. I was asking about him, about intent, about something deeper than control. He did not answer immediately, and for a second, I thought he might not answer at all. But then he stepped closer, just enough to close the distance in a way that felt deliberate, intentional, his voice lower now, not softer, just more direct. Because you did not look away, he said, and that caught me off guard, my brows pulling together slightly. From what? I asked. He held my gaze, steady, unwavering. From me, he said quietly, and something about that answer shifted the space between us. Not smaller, not safer, but different. Like the line I thought I understood had just moved without warning. I felt my breath slow, my thoughts narrowing into something sharper, something more aware. And in that moment, I realized something I had not expected. I was no longer just trying to leave. I was trying to understand why part of me was not sure I wanted to. His words did not leave the room when he said them. They stayed, settling somewhere deeper than I expected. And I hated that part of me understood exactly what he meant, because he was right. I had not looked away, not in the elevator, not in the hallway, not even now. And that said something about me I had not fully faced yet. I held his gaze for a second longer than I should have, then broke it first, turning slightly toward the window again, needing space, not distance, just a moment to think without feeling like every thought was being read before I finished it. That is not a reason, I said quietly, but it did not sound as certain as I wanted. He did not follow me immediately, did not close the gap again. He let the space exist, which somehow made his presence feel even more controlled, more deliberate. It is enough of one, he replied, his voice steady behind me. I exhaled slowly, watching the rain trace uneven paths down the glass, the city lights shifting beneath it, blurred but constant. I could still hear everything out there in my head, the noise, the unpredictability, the way nothing waited for you to catch up. And then I looked at this room again, at the stillness, the structure, the way nothing moved unless it was meant to, and the contrast was sharper now, clearer. I turned back toward him, my arms lowering from where they had been loosely crossed, not defensive anymore, just aware. You are used to people avoiding you, I said, not accusing, just stating what felt obvious now. He did not react immediately, but there was a slight shift in his expression, something that confirmed it without words. Most people understand what I represent, he said. And there it was, not explained, not softened, just stated. I studied him for a moment, really looked this time, not just at the suit or the posture or the control, but at the way he held himself like nothing around him was uncertain, like everything had already been calculated before it happened. And what is that? I asked, quieter now, because I already knew part of the answer. He stepped closer again, not invading, not overwhelming, just enough to bring the focus back to him. Consequence, he said, and the word landed with more weight than anything else he had said so far. I felt it settle in my chest. Not fear exactly, but recognition, because that was what tonight had been about. Consequences, running, choosing, stepping into something without understanding it. I let out a slow breath, my thoughts shifting again, not scattered, not reactive, but aligning into something clearer. Then why give me a choice? I asked, because that was the part that did not fit. If he controlled everything, if this was all structure and system, and calculated outcomes, then why leave anything up to me? He watched me for a long second, and this time, the silence felt different, not testing, not measuring, just honest. Because forced decisions do not last, he said finally, and I do not build anything temporary. I blinked slightly, caught off guard by the phrasing, not because it was complicated, but because it was simple, direct, and somehow more revealing than anything else he had said. I looked down for a moment, letting that settle, then back up at him. So this is long-term, I said slowly, not quite asking. He held my gaze, unwavering. Everything I do is, he replied, and there was no hesitation in it, no room for doubt. I swallowed, my fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the table beside me, grounding myself again, because the weight of that answer was different. It was not about tonight anymore, not just about safety or control or getting away from something. It was about what came after, what I chose to step into. I moved a few steps further into the room, creating space again, not to escape, but to think, to breathe, to feel the difference between where I had been and where I was now. And for the first time since everything started, the panic was not leading anymore. It was quieter, replaced by something sharper, something more deliberate. I turned back toward him one more time, my voice steady, clear. Then here is my condition, I said, and even as I spoke, I realized that I meant it, that I was not just reacting anymore. I was setting something of my own. His gaze sharpened slightly, not in resistance, but in attention. You said no lies, I continued. So that goes both ways. A pause, just long enough to make sure the words landed. If I stay, you do not hide things from me that affect me. The room felt stiller after that, like even the air was waiting for his response. He did not answer immediately, but he did not look away either. and that alone told me this mattered. That I had crossed into something different, not just someone inside his system, but someone he had to consider, even if only slightly. And when he finally spoke, his voice was just as calm as before, but there was something new beneath it, something more defined. Then you will need to learn faster than you expect, he said, and I held his gaze, not backing down, not looking away, because for the first time, I understood what that meant, not just being here, not just following rules, but stepping into a world that did not slow down for anyone, not even me. And as the rain continued to trace quiet lines down the glass behind him, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else so far. I was not just being protected anymore, I was being positioned. The word position did not sit quietly in my mind. It moved, expanding into something I could not ignore, something that changed the way I looked at everything in that room, at him, at myself. I stood there for a moment longer, feeling the shift settle into place, not sudden, not dramatic, but undeniable. I was no longer reacting to what had happened. I was part of what would happen next. I lifted my chin slightly, meeting his gaze without hesitation this time. Then I learned, I said, my voice steady, more grounded than before, not because I felt safe, but because I understood the stakes differently now. He studied me for a second, and there was something there, not approval, not surprise, just recognition, like I had crossed a line he had been waiting for me to see. You will, he replied, simple, certain, like it was not a possibility but an outcome. I exhaled slowly, letting that settle, then glanced once more around the room, taking it in with new awareness, not just the furniture, not just the layout, but the intention behind it, everything placed for a reason, everything serving a purpose, even me. I moved toward the window again, my reflection faint against the glass, the city stretching out below, alive, unpredictable, distant. I rested my hand lightly against the cool surface, grounding myself again, then asked the question that had been forming beneath everything else. What happens if I make the wrong choice? I did not turn when I said it, but I felt his attention sharpen behind me, not in pressure, but in focus. He stepped closer, stopping just enough behind me that I could sense him without feeling crowded. Then you adjust, he said, calm, measured. I frowned slightly, turning my head just enough to glance at him. That is it, I asked. He held my gaze, unwavering. There is no such thing as a permanent mistake, he said. Only decisions you fail to correct. I let out a quiet breath, something about that easing attention I had not realized I was carrying, not because it made things easier, but because it made them clearer. I nodded once, slowly, then looked back out at the city, my thoughts aligning in a way they had not before. Less noise, more direction. And you, I said, softer now. You have never made the wrong decision. I felt rather than saw the shift in him, subtle, almost invisible, but real. He did not answer immediately, and for the first time, that silence did not feel controlled. It felt considered. I have made many, he said finally, and that answer surprised me more than anything else he had said so far. I turned fully this time, facing him, searching his expression for something that matched the words, something that explained them. Then why do you sound so certain? I asked. He met my gaze, steady, but there was something new there now, something quieter beneath the control, because I learned from them, he said, and the simplicity of it made it heavier, more real. I held his eyes for a second longer, then nodded, accepting that answer in a way I had not expected to, not because I trusted him completely, but because I recognized the truth in it. I stepped away from the window, moving further into the room, my movements slower now, more deliberate, like I was already adjusting to the rhythm of this place, this system, this world. I stopped near the center of the room, turning back toward him one more time. Then we start with something simple, I said, my voice steady, controlled. His gaze sharpened slightly, attentive. You said I need to learn fast, I continued. So start with the part you did not explain. A pause, just long enough to make sure he understood exactly what I meant, who you really are. The question hung in the air between us, heavier than the ones before it. Not about rules, not about safety, but about identity, about the center of everything I had just stepped into. He did not look away, did not deflect, did not avoid it, and that alone told me this mattered, that this was not just another detail, This was the foundation, the line that separated understanding from ignorance, control from trust. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, not softer, but more defined, more deliberate. "My name is Luca Romano," he said, and something in the way he said it made the room feel smaller, more focused, like everything had just aligned around that single fact. I held his gaze, letting the name settle, feeling the weight behind it, even if I did not fully understand it yet. And then he added, just enough to make sure I did not underestimate what it meant. "And everything you see here," a brief pause, "answers to me." I felt my breath slow, my thoughts sharpen, the last pieces clicking into place, not all of them, not yet, but enough to understand one thing clearly. This was not just a man offering protection. This was a man who defined the environment itself. And as I stood there, no longer outside of it, but undeniably inside, I realized something that changed everything. I had not just stepped into his world. I had stepped into something that already knew exactly where I stood within it. His name did not echo. It settled, heavy and precise, like it had been placed exactly where it was meant to land. Luca Romano. I repeated it silently in my mind, not because I needed to remember it, but because I needed to understand what came with it, the way he stood, the way everything around him aligned without question. It was not just a name, it was structure, authority, something built long before I ever stepped into that elevator. I held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once. Slow, deliberate. "So this is your world," I said, not asking anymore, just acknowledging what was already clear. He did not correct me, which was answer enough. I exhaled quietly, my thoughts moving faster now, sharper, connecting pieces that had felt separate before. The private floor, the silent men, the controlled access, the way he spoke, and things shifted without hesitation. It all pointed to one thing, not just power, but established power, the kind that did not need to prove itself. Because it was already understood, I took a small step back, not retreating, just creating space to think, to see him more clearly, not as the man in the elevator, but as the center of everything I had just entered. "And I am inside it," I said softly, more to myself than to him. But he heard it anyway. "Yes," he replied, simple, direct, no hesitation. I swallowed, feeling the weight of that settle fully now. There was no illusion left, no misunderstanding. I was not passing through. I was standing in something defined, something structured, something that would not bend just because I wanted it to. I shifted my weight slightly, grounding myself again, then asked the question that followed naturally. "Then tell me what I am to you," I said, my voice steady, because that mattered now more than anything else. Not the space, not the rules, but my place within it. He studied me for a second, not avoiding the question, not deflecting it, just considering it with the same precision he had applied to everything else. "You are a variable," he said, calm, controlled. I felt that word hit differently this time. Not unfamiliar, but clearer, more defined. One that entered my system without being accounted for. He continued. I nodded slightly, absorbing it, not reacting emotionally, just processing. "And what happens to variables?" I asked. He took a step closer, just enough to bring the focus back to him again. "They are evaluated," he said. "Understood." A brief pause then, and placed accordingly. The last part settled heavier than the others. I held his gaze, not backing away from it, even though I understood what it meant now more than I had before. "Placed where?" I asked quietly, because I needed to hear it, not assume it. He did not answer immediately, and that pause felt intentional, like he was choosing his words carefully, not to soften them, but to make them exact, where they create the least risk. He said finally. I exhaled slowly, my mind catching up to that, turning it over, understanding the logic behind it even if I did not fully accept it yet. "So I am a risk," I said, not offended, just stating the conclusion. He shook his head slightly. "You are an unknown," he corrected. "Risk comes from what is not understood." I let that sit for a second, because it made sense, more than I wanted it to. I glanced briefly toward the window again, then back at him. My thoughts aligning again, sharper now, more intentional. "And how do I stop being unknown?" I asked, because that was the part one could control. He met my gaze, steady as ever. "You stay," he said. "You learn. You move within structure." A pause, then, quieter, more direct. And you do not hide from what you are. I frowned slightly, that last part catching my attention. What I am. I repeated. He held my gaze, unwavering. Someone who did not look away, he said again. And this time, I understood it differently, not just as a moment, but as a pattern, a choice, something that defined more than I had realized. I let out a slow breath, my shoulders easing just slightly as the last pieces began to settle into place. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to move forward, enough to decide. I looked at him one more time, steady, aware, no longer just reacting to him, but engaging with what he represented. And when I spoke again, my voice carried that shift fully. Then, do not treat me like something temporary, I said, a quiet firmness in my tone that had not been there before. His gaze sharpened slightly, not in resistance, but in recognition, like he understood exactly what I meant. If I stay, I continued, I am not just something you observe. A pause, just long enough to make sure the words landed. I am something you invest in. The room felt still after that, the kind of stillness that came before something shifted, and as I held his gaze, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else so far. I was no longer asking where I stood, I was defining it. The words stayed between us longer than anything else had, not loud, not dramatic, but firm in a way that could not be ignored. I am something you invest in. I could feel the shift the moment I said it, not just in the room, but in him, subtle, controlled. But there, his gaze did not break, did not soften, but it changed, like something had been recalculated, something reassessed. And for the first time since I met him, I felt like I was no longer just being observed. I was being considered. You are defining terms, he said quietly, not as a challenge, but as recognition. I held his gaze, steady, unflinching. You said this is a system, I replied. Then I am not stepping into it without knowing where I stand. He took a step closer, not enough to intimidate, just enough to close the space again, deliberate as always. Most people do not negotiate when they are uncertain, he said. I let out a quiet breath, something almost like a small, controlled smile pulling at the edge of my expression. Most people did not run into your elevator tonight, I said, and that landed. I could see it, not in his reaction, but in the absence of dismissal. He did not reject it. He accepted it as fact, which meant something. He studied me for a second longer, then nodded once, slow, precise, like a decision had been made. Then we adjust the structure, he said, and those words carried weight, more than anything else he had offered so far, not because of what they meant immediately, but because of what they implied. He was not just allowing me inside his system, he was altering it, even if only slightly. I felt that realization settle deeper than I expected, not as comfort, but as awareness. This was not something he did lightly. I straightened slightly, my shoulders settling into a more grounded posture, not defensive, not uncertain, just present. Then say it clearly, I said, my voice steady. What does that look like? He held my gaze, unwavering, then answered. It means you are not just contained, he said. You are integrated. The word landed differently, heavier, more permanent. I felt it settle in my chest, not fully understood, but significant. Integrated how? I asked, because that mattered. The details mattered now more than anything else. He moved slightly to the side, not turning away from me, but shifting the space so it felt less like confrontation and more like alignment. You will be informed when decisions affect you, he said. You will not be moved without understanding why. A pause. Then, more deliberate. And your position will not be temporary. I exhaled slowly, absorbing that, feeling the structure of it, the clarity, the intention. It was not freedom, but it was not confinement either. It was something else, something defined, something structured with purpose. I nodded once, slowly, then looked at him again. And in return, I said, because there was always a return, always a balance. He did not hesitate. You remain within the system, he said. You follow the rules we established, and then, quieter, more direct, and you do not break trust. I held his gaze, letting that settle, because that part was different, not just a rule, but a boundary, something that carried more weight than the others. I took a slow breath, my thoughts no longer scattered, no longer reactive, just clear, aligned, and for the first time, I felt something close to certainty, not about him, not about this world, but about myself within it. I nodded once, more firmly this time. Then that is the agreement, I said, and the words did not feel forced. They felt chosen, fully, intentionally. He studied me for a second longer, then gave a single, precise nod, sealing it without needing anything more. No handshake, no contract, just understanding, and somehow that felt more binding than anything written could have been. The room felt different again after that. Not smaller, not larger, but more defined, like everything had just shifted into place. I exhaled quietly, my shoulders easing slightly, then glanced once more toward the window. The city still moving below, unchanged, distant, but no longer something I felt pulled toward. Not right now. I turned back to him one last time, my voice quieter now, but steady, grounded in a way it had not been before. So what happens now? I asked, not out of uncertainty, but out of readiness. He met my gaze, calm, controlled, as always, but there was something else there now, something more aligned with mine. Now, he said, you stop being a variable. A brief pause, just enough to let the words settle, and you become part of the structure. I felt that land fully this time, not as something imposed, but as something accepted, something chosen, and as I stood there, no longer at the edge of his world but undeniably inside it, I realized something that changed everything. I was not waiting for what came next anymore. I was stepping into it. The word structure did not feel like something external anymore. It felt like something I was standing inside, something that had already adjusted around me in ways I was only beginning to understand. I let out a slow breath, my shoulders settling as the last of the tension from earlier began to fade into something quieter, more controlled, not gone, just managed. I looked at him again. Luca Romano, not as a stranger now, not even as a threat, but as a fixed point in something much larger than I had first seen. Then I start now, I said, my voice steady, not asking for permission, just stating what I had already decided. He studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod, the kind that confirmed without needing to expand. You already have, he replied, and something about that felt accurate, like the shift had not just happened when I spoke, but long before, back in the elevator. Maybe even before that. I moved further into the room, slower now, my steps no longer uncertain, just deliberate. I set my bag down on the table, the small motion grounding me, marking the space as something I was no longer just passing through. I glanced briefly at the couch, then back at him. You said I need to learn fast, I said, so do not start tomorrow. A pause, just enough to make sure the intention was clear. Start now. He did not respond immediately, but there was a subtle shift in his posture, not defensive, not resistant, just attentive, like he had expected that, like this was part of the outcome he had already calculated. Then we begin with awareness, he said, stepping slightly closer, not to close the space, but to focus it. Everything you notice matters. I frowned slightly. That is vague, I said. He shook his head once. It is precise, he corrected. You just are not used to thinking that way yet. I held his gaze, absorbing that, then nodded once, accepting it for what it was. Then give me something specific, I said, because that was how I worked, how I understood things. He glanced briefly toward the window, then back at me. What do you see? He asked. I turned slightly, following his line of sight, looking out at the city again, but this time differently, not just seeing it, but observing it. The movement, the rhythm, the patterns, the way certain streets carried more traffic, the way lights shifted in clusters, the way some buildings remained dark while others stayed active. Movement, I said slowly. Patterns, a pause. Then, more certain. Control in some places, none in others, he nodded once. And where do you think we are? He asked. I glanced back at him, then toward the window again. The height, the distance, the isolation, the way nothing here felt connected to the chaos below. Above it, I said quietly, and that answer felt more than physical. It felt conceptual. He studied me for a second, then spoke again. Not above, he said, outside. I felt that correction settle differently, sharper, more intentional. Outside meant separate, not just higher, not just removed, but operating under different rules entirely. I nodded slowly, understanding that shift, that distinction. I turned back to him fully, my thoughts aligning faster now, clearer. So this is not just protection, I said. It is separation. He held my gaze, unwavering. It is control over environment. He corrected, and again, that word landed with weight. I took a slow breath, feeling the pattern now, the way he defined things, not emotionally, not loosely, but exactly, every word placed where it needed to be. I stepped slightly closer, not enough to invade, just enough to match the focus. Then what do I need to control? I asked, because that was the next step, the part that mattered for me. He did not hesitate this time. Your reactions, he said. Simple, direct. I blinked slightly, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. He continued before I could respond. You already observe, he said. You already question. A pause then, quieter, more deliberate. But you react before you decide. I felt that land. Immediately, because it was true, the running, the fear, the instinct to escape. Even the way I had spoken earlier, all of it driven by reaction first. Understanding second, I let out a slow breath, my shoulders easing as I processed that. Not defensive, just aware, so I slowed down. I said, more to myself than to him. He nodded once. You choose before you move. He corrected, and that phrasing mattered. I felt it. The difference between hesitation and decision. I held his gaze for a moment. Longer, then nodded, more firmly this time, accepting it, not because he said it, but because I understood it. I glanced once more around the room, seeing it differently now, not just as a place, but as a controlled space where every movement had meaning. Then back at him, my voice steady, grounded. Then that is where I start, I said, and this time, there was no hesitation behind it, no uncertainty, just clarity. And as the rain outside began to soften, fading into a quieter rhythm against the glass, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else so far. I was not just learning his world anymore. I was learning how to exist inside it without losing control of myself. The room felt quieter than before, not because anything had changed, but because I had. The noise in my head had settled into something sharper, more controlled, and for the first time that night, I was not trying to escape the moment. I was inside it, fully aware, fully present. I stood there for a second longer, letting that realization anchor itself, then moved slowly toward the window again, not out of instinct this time, but by choice, my reflection meeting me halfway in the glass. Steadier now, less uncertain, the city beyond still moving, still unpredictable, but no longer something I felt pulled toward. Not tonight. Maybe not for a while. I rested my hand lightly against the surface, feeling the coolness, grounding myself in something real, something immediate. You were right, I said quietly, not turning yet. He did not ask what I meant, he already knew. I react too fast. I continued, my voice calm, not defensive, just honest, and that felt different, saying it. Without needing to justify it, he stepped closer, stopping just behind me, not crowding, not imposing, just present. You move to survive, he said. That is not weakness. I turned slightly at that, looking at him again, because that mattered, the distinction mattered, but it is not enough, I said, finishing the thought myself. He held my gaze, a small nod confirming it. Not here, he replied, and I understood what he meant now. This place did not reward reaction, it required intention. Awareness, control. I exhaled slowly, letting that settle deeper, then stepped away from the window, turning fully toward him, my posture more grounded than it had been all night. Then I do it differently, I said, not as a question, not as a promise, just a decision. His gaze sharpened slightly, attentive, not surprised, just focused, like he was watching the shift happen in real time. Then show me, I added, and that was new. Not asking for safety, not asking for answers, but asking to learn, to engage, to step forward instead of back. The room held still for a moment after that. Like even the air recognized something had changed. He studied me for a second longer, then gave a slight nod. Not approval, not permission, just acknowledgement. Tomorrow, he said, you will see how this world functions beyond these walls. I felt a small shift in my chest at that. Not fear, not excitement, something in between, something sharper. And tonight, I asked, because that mattered too, the space between now. And then, he glanced briefly toward the door, then back at me. Tonight, you learn stillness, he said. And that sounded simple. But I knew it was not. Not in a place like this. Not with everything I had just stepped into. I nodded slowly, accepting that. Understanding it more than I expected to, I moved toward the couch, sitting down carefully, not out of exhaustion, but out of intention, placing myself in the space instead of hovering at the edges of it, my bag resting beside me, my phone still silent inside it. The outside world muted for now. I leaned back slightly, letting my shoulders relax, not completely, but enough to feel the difference between before and now. I looked up at him again, still standing, still composed, still exactly where he needed to be without effort. And you, I said quietly. Do you ever stop moving? He held my gaze for a second, then answered in the same calm tone he had used all night. Only when it serves a purpose. I let out a quiet breath, something close to understanding settling in. Everything here had a reason, every pause, every step, every word, nothing wasted, nothing accidental. I nodded once, more to myself than to him, then leaned back slightly, letting the silence take its place without trying to fill it, because for the first time, it did not feel empty. It felt controlled, intentional, like everything else here. And as I sat there, no longer trying to escape the quiet, but learning how to exist within it, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else so far. I had not just run into the wrong place. I had run into a world that would not let me stay the same. And for the first time, I was not sure I wanted to be.